Lance was a good patient. It hurt to do the therapy, but he did it obediently, and he knew he was getting stronger. He used the walker and was walking around the garden. Now Elaine, as predicted, stayed there, and she stayed real close to him too, because she knew he might fall. So for a while they walked around, and partly to ignore the pain. Uh, Lance said at one point, "Elaine, how about you? I'd like to know more about you." Well, Elaine, as was she used to do that a lot, she blushed bright red, and she said, "Well, what do you want to know about me?" And Lance said, "Let's finish this and we sit down, and I want to hear your story." So they walked around a little bit more and sat down at the table. But before they went on to Elaine's story, Elaine wanted to work on his shoulder. That was her specialty, she felt. And so he was sitting there, and she went behind him. And as I've said before, she'd work on the left side, and which didn't hurt, and she could feel things and kind of make it feel good, and also figure out what could be done with that arm. And then she'd go to the right side. She was a natural. Maybe she got it from her GMA. And she would do the same. Of course, it hurt. But then she went and had him put his left arm on the table and massaged it. Not that it really needed it. Then she went to the right arm, put that on the table, which was such a huge chore. Of course, she had to lift it to get it on there. But then once it was there, she massaged it, and well, you can imagine how it is, and then stopped. She even got a cushion off one of the chairs that was out there, and had him lay his head. It was her idea. She'd never seen it done. Had him lay his head on the picnic table and turned one way, then turned the other way, and did the same thing with her arms. She was, like I said, she was a natural. But anyway, after a while, that was enough of that, and she sat down opposite him and said, "Okay, Lance, what would you like to know?" Now, Violet, her kitchen was set up in such a way that where she did the dishes, the sink, she could see out the window, and she could see these two out there, and she had to smile because she knew this was a real first for Elaine. I mean, wasn't a date, of course, but it was to be alone like that with a man. She was fascinated to see how her little granddaughter, hardly little anymore, was working at that, and so she could see they were talking. Well, Lance got the story. Found out she was from Georgia, and Elaine managed to make it through telling how unhappy she'd been in Manhattan, and she even managed to explain about her mother being killed in that accident with the bus. But at that point, though, she herself put her head down, and she couldn't help it. She cried a little bit. It upset her, and Lance. I wasn't intimate to the conversation, but you can imagine that he wanted to make her feel better. I imagine, although like I say, I can't say for sure. I imagine he took his left arm that was good and working, and touched her and tried to comfort her a little bit. But anyway, she recovered, and Lance asked to keep the conversation going and maybe to get her mind off that. He said, "And the language, Georgian, you can speak it?" And Elaine said, "I think so. My mother's the only one I ever spoke it with, but I think I can." She used to sing songs to me, and we spent almost all our time speaking Georgian. And Lance said, that's just so cool. And now that I know about your mother and where she's from, I can see that's where you get your amazing beauty. You're really a beautiful girl. And at which point Elaine said, it was so unlike her, said, "Am I as pretty as Morgan?" Well, what was Lance going to say to that? He said, that's impossible to answer. Morgan is my queen. Uh, Nobody can compare with Morgan. But I can tell you this, Elaine, you're about the prettiest girl I can ever remember seeing. And I'm sure at some point you're going to be some man's queen, and that's going to be a lucky man. So the conversation kind of went like that. Eventually, and they stayed longer than they really would have needed to, Violet eventually went to the door and she said, "Supper's ready." And so they came in. And Violet could see by her granddaughter's eyes that she'd been crying, but Violet didn't even need to ask why, because she knew what had happened. She had the sight, sometimes people say.